Growing up, I was always the afterthought in my family. My older sister, Sophia, was everything I wasn't: beautiful, talented, and perfectly healthy. She was the golden child, basking in our parents' endless adoration, while I was more of a responsibility than a daughter. My severe cardiac condition didn't just make life harder for me, it made life harder for them. They made sure I knew that. "Do you know how much we've sacrificed for you?" was practically their mantra whenever my medical bills came up. Meanwhile, Sophia could do no wrong. Every achievement of hers, no matter how small, was celebrated with extravagant fanfare. Straight A's? A new car? Winning a minor school award? Dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town? Me? I got a pat on the head and a reminder to not stress out. It's no surprise that I distanced myself once I became an adult. After college, I moved 3 states away, built a life with my husband, Ethan, and only communicated with my parents out of obligation. The phone calls were infrequent and short, just enough to keep the peace. So, when my mom called early one Sunday morning, her name lighting up my phone, I hesitated before answering. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice unusually upbeat. It put me on edge immediately. My mom wasn't a sweetie type of person. "We need you to come over. It's important family business. We're all getting together." I hadn't been all together with them in years, and I wasn't sure I wanted to break that streak. "What's this about?" I asked cautiously. "It's better if we talk in person." "It's exciting." Her cheerfulness felt forced, but before I could press for details, she added, "Just come, okay? It's been so long since we've all been in the same room. Please." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Ethan, who had been listening in, raised an eyebrow as I hung up. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted, "but if I don't go, they'll make me the bad guy for avoiding the family. It's easier to just deal with it." He didn't look convinced, but didn't push it further. He just made me promise to call him if things got weird. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was strangely tense. My dad opened the door and gave me an awkward smile. "Good to see you, kiddo," he said, though his tone was stiff. I walked into the living room, where my mom, Sophia, and Eric, Sophia's husband, were waiting. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. The tension in the room felt like static in the air, making my skin crawl. "We're so glad you could make it," my mom said, her voice sugary sweet. It was unsettling. Sophia didn't say much at first, just gave me a tight-lipped smile. Eric looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between the others. Something was definitely up. "Let's sit," my dad said, gesturing toward the couch. I sat down, and before I could even ask what was going on, my mom handed me a folder. "We've been thinking a lot about family," she began. "About how important it is to support each other, especially in tough times." I opened the folder, skimming the documents inside. At first, they didn't make sense: medical forms, test results, evaluations. And then it hit me, they were about me. But they weren't accurate. These documents painted a picture of someone in perfect health, with no sign of the cardiac condition that had defined my entire life. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. My dad cleared his throat. "It's your medical profile. We had it reviewed by a specialist, and they agree you're perfectly capable of carrying a pregnancy. There's no reason you can't be a surrogate for Sophia." My stomach dropped. I looked up at them, stunned. "A surrogate? Are you serious?" Sophia, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "We've been trying for years," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And adoption isn't an option for us. I need this, and you're the only one who can help." "You need this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What about what I need? Did you forget I have a heart condition? Pregnancy could kill me." "That's not what the records say," my mom interjected smoothly. "The doctors confirmed you're fine." "Doctors?" I scoffed, holding up the papers. "These are fake. You forged my medical records." My dad frowned. "We didn't forge them. We clarified the details. You've always been dramatic about your condition, and we knew you'd use it as an excuse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "An excuse? Do you hear yourselves? You're asking me to risk my life for Sophia." Sophia's face hardened.
"You're being selfish," she snapped.
"Do you know what I've been through? I deserve to have a family, and you're refusing to help me because you're scared." I stood up, my hands shaking. "This isn't just scared, Sophia. This is my life we're talking about." My mom reached out as if to calm me. "Please, sweetie. We've sacrificed so much for you. This is your chance to give back." That was the breaking point. Give back, I said, my voice icy. You've made it clear my entire life that I'm just an obligation to you. And now you want me to die so Sophia can have a baby?
No.
Absolutely not. The room fell silent. My dad looked furious, my mom looked hurt, and Sophia looked like she was ready to explode. Eric, meanwhile, stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I grabbed my things and headed for the door. Don't call me again, I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. As I drove away, my phone started buzzing with messages, first from my mom, then from Sophia. Each one was angrier than the last, accusing me of being heartless, ungrateful, and selfish. I ignored them all, but the weight of their words settled heavily on my chest. When I got home, Ethan took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. What happened? He asked. They wanted me to be Sophia's surrogate, I said, my voice hollow. They even forged medical records to make it happen. His arms tightened around me. You're not going back there, he said firmly. For the first time in years, I felt truly safe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I couldn't stop staring at the folder, my vision blurring as I flipped through the forged medical records. Blood tests I never took, clearances I never received, and a glowing summary of my non-existent, perfect health. It was all a lie, and they'd gone to terrifying lengths to create it. My dad's voice droned on in the background, each word grating on my already frayed nerves. We've always been proud of Sophia, he was saying, his tone bordering on reverent. Her career, her marriage, her commitment to family. She's the kind of daughter any parent would dream of. I glanced up, my jaw tightening. And I'm what, exactly? Don't twist my words, he said sharply. You've had your struggles, and we've stood by you. But now it's your turn to step up for Sophia. She's devastated, and this is your chance to help her get the one thing she's always wanted, a child of her own. I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me like a boulder. My mom, perched on the arm of the couch beside Sophia, chimed in with her signature blend of passive aggression. You're her sister, she said, her voice syrupy but laced with steel. We all make sacrifices for the people we love. This is the least you can do after everything we've done for you. Everything they'd done for me? The phrase hit like a slap. My life had been a constant reminder of how much I owed them for keeping me alive. Every hospital stay, every surgery, every prescription, it had all come with a running tab of guilt. And now they were cashing it in. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. You do realize what you're asking me to do, right? My cardiologist has made it clear, pregnancy could kill me. Have you forgotten that? Sophia scoffed, leaning forward with a look of pure contempt. You're just making excuses, she snapped. There's no way it's as dangerous as you're making it sound. You've always been a drama queen when it comes to your health. Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Sophia had always been dismissive of my condition, treating it like an inconvenience rather than a legitimate threat to my life. Drama queen, I echoed, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? This isn't about being dramatic, it's about staying alive. My mom's tone turned icy. We didn't raise you to be so selfish, she said. Sophia's happiness is at stake, and you're refusing to help her? After all she's done for you. All she's done for me? I repeated, incredulous. What exactly has she done for me, besides treat me like I don't matter? Sophia's face twisted with anger. I've had to put up with you my entire life. Do you know how exhausting it is to always have to take a back seat because of your issues? You can't even do this one thing for me? My chest tightened, a familiar ache spreading through me. I instinctively pressed a hand to my sternum, willing my heart to calm down. The room was suffocating, and their voices felt like knives, each word cutting deeper. Eric, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke. Maybe we should all just take a step back, he said quietly. His words were reasonable, but his tone was hesitant, like he didn't want to get involved but felt obligated to say something. Sophia shot him a glare that could have frozen lava. Step back? Are you kidding me, Eric? You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side, he said carefully. But this feels extreme. My dad cut in before Sophia could respond. This isn't extreme. This is family. And family means doing whatever it takes to support each other. No, I said firmly, finding my voice again. Family isn't supposed to mean sacrificing someone else's life for your own convenience. My mom stood up, her expression shifting to one of deep disappointment. If you walk away from this, she said, her voice low but cutting, don't expect us to be there for you when you need us. Family is about give and take, and right now you're just taking. It was then I realized this wasn't a request. This was an ultimatum. Either I agreed to their insane plan, or I was dead to them. I stood, gripping the folder so tightly that the edges dug into my palms. If this is what family means to you, I said, my voice shaking, then I don't need it. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I could hear Sophia yelling something behind me, but I didn't stop. The cool air outside hit me like a lifeline, and I gulped it down, trying to steady myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I didn't need to look to know it was them, already trying to reel me back in. By the time I got home, I felt like I'd been through a war. Ethan took one look at my face and guided me to the couch, his hands gentle but firm. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. I told him about the folder, the forged medical records, the guilt trips, and the way they'd turned my condition into nothing more than an obstacle to their plan. His face darkened as I spoke, his jaw tightening with each new detail. "They're insane," he said when I finished. "They're completely, certifiably insane." I nodded, tears spilling over despite my best efforts to hold them back. "They don't care if I live or die," I whispered. "As long as Sophia gets what she wants." Ethan pulled me into a tight hug, his voice fierce in my ear. "They don't get to treat you like this. Not anymore." For the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe. But even as I clung to him, I knew this was just the beginning. My parents and Sophia weren't going to let this go. They never had before. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The moment I refused, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to explosive. My dad's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he stared at me. "We already checked with the doctors," he said, his voice low and controlled, as though he were explaining something simple to a stubborn child. "You're fine. There's no risk. Those aren't real doctors." I snapped, holding up the forged medical records. My hands trembled, whether from anger or the beginnings of exhaustion. I wasn't sure. "This is fake. You forged this because you knew what my actual doctors would say." My mom rolled her eyes, brushing off my accusation like it was a minor inconvenience. "That's irrelevant," she said with an exasperated sigh. "Sophia needs you. Family supports family no matter what. And don't act like this is such a big deal. Women have babies all the time. Not women with my condition," I shouted. My chest tightened as I spoke, the familiar flutter of my heart warning me to calm down. I placed a hand on my sternum and took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Do you even care that this could kill me?" Sophia crossed her arms, her expression icy. "You're being dramatic again. If you'd just stop focusing on yourself for once." "Stop focusing on myself?" I cut her off, incredulous. "You're asking me to risk my life for your convenience and I'm selfish?" Eric, who had been sitting awkwardly at the edge of the couch, shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then thought better of it, staying silent. His refusal to intervene felt like a betrayal, even though I could see the unease written all over his face. My dad leaned forward, his tone hardening. "You've always been ungrateful," he said, his words hitting like a slap. "Do you have any idea how much we've sacrificed for you? All those years of medical bills, the stress, the sleepless nights, you owe us, and now you're refusing to give back." I stared at him, the weight of his words crushing me. "You think I owe you for keeping me alive? For being my parents? You've made my entire life about what I couldn't do, about what a burden I was, and now you want me to throw away the one thing I have, my life, for Sophia's sake?"
"No."
My mom stood, her expression cold and unyielding. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to forgive you," she said. "You're turning your back on your family, and that's something we won't forget." I turned toward the door, my heart pounding erratically. "Then I guess we're done here." The drive home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face, but my emotions felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else cry. By the time I walked through the front door, I was drained, physically, emotionally, in every way possible. Ethan met me in the hallway, his face creased with worry. "What happened?" he asked, his hands resting gently on my arms. "They forged my medical records," I said, my voice flat. "They want me to be Sophia's surrogate. And when I said no, they called me selfish." I watched the muscles in Ethan's jaw tighten, his eyes darkening with fury. "They did what?" "They don't care if it kills me," I continued, my voice trembling. "They think I owe them for everything." I couldn't finish the sentence, my throat tightening as a sob escaped. Ethan pulled me into a hug, his arms wrapping around me protectively. "You're not alone in this," he murmured. "We'll handle it. They're not going to get away with this." But that night, the storm began. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls and texts, first from my mom, then from Sophia, and finally from unknown numbers. The messages ranged from angry tirades to guilt-laden pleas, all variations of the same theme. I was selfish, ungrateful, and a horrible sister. One text from my mom stood out. It was longer than the others, almost poetic in its cruelty. "We could have abandoned you when you were born," it read. "Do you know how many families would have walked away from a child with so many issues? But we didn't. We chose to keep you, to raise you, to sacrifice everything for you. And this is how you repay us." I blocked her number. Then I blocked Sophia's. But they weren't done. They started calling from other phones, burner numbers, relatives' lines, even Eric's phone once. Every call brought another wave of accusations, each one more painful than the last. And it wasn't just them. Somehow, word had spread to our extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt entitled to weigh in on my decision. "Family means everything," one cousin wrote in a group chat I'd forgotten I was in. "You're tearing yours apart." Some were subtler, couching their guilt trips in concern. "Sophia must be heartbroken," an aunt texted. "You should really think about what you're doing, sweetheart." By the end of the week, I felt like I was drowning. Ethan tried to shield me from the worst of it, taking my phone when I couldn't handle the barrage anymore. But the messages seeped into every corner of my life, a constant reminder of how alone I was in this fight. "They're trying to wear you down," Ethan said one night, as we sat on the couch, the glow of the television casting soft shadows on the walls. "They think if they push hard enough, you'll cave." "They don't know me very well, then," I said, but the words felt hollow. I was exhausted, and every interaction with them felt like another layer of armor being stripped away. "They don't care about you," Ethan said firmly. "They care about controlling you. There's a difference." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the guilt. Somewhere deep down, a part of me still wanted their approval, even though I knew it would never come. And as much as I hated to admit it, their words had planted a seed of doubt. What if they were right? What if I really was selfish? Ethan squeezed my hand, as if sensing my thoughts. "You're not selfish," he said quietly. "You're brave. Don't let them make you forget that." I leaned into him, the sound of his heartbeat steady and strong against my ear. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. But I knew this was far from over. My parents and Sophia weren't going to stop. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to keep fighting. The first time my parents showed up unannounced, it was early morning. Ethan had just left for work, and I was still in my pajamas, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee when I heard the knock at the door. I peeked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. My mom stood there, arms crossed, with my dad looming just behind her. "Open the door," my mom called out, her voice sharp and commanding. I stayed silent, heart racing. Maybe if I didn't respond, they'd leave. But she knocked again, louder this time. "We're not going anywhere until you talk to us." I stood frozen, willing them to go away. After a few more minutes of knocking and muttering to each other, they finally left. When I went to check the mailbox later, I found the first note, "Sophia would do it for you." The second visit was worse. This time, they stayed longer, pounding on the door and shouting accusations loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You're tearing this family apart," my dad yelled. "How can you be so heartless?" When I didn't answer, they slipped another note under the door. This one simply said, "You owe us." The visits were bad enough, but things took a chilling turn when I got a call from an unknown number a few days later. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello, is this your name?" a woman's voice asked, formal and detached. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Jennifer Mitchell, legal counsel for Sophia, last name." My stomach dropped. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. "We've been retained to explore legal avenues regarding the surrogacy arrangement," she said, her tone professional but icy. "I'd like to schedule a time to discuss this further." I laughed bitterly. "You're joking, right? You can't legally force someone to be a surrogate." "I understand your concerns," she replied, as though I'd just complained about a minor inconvenience. "But there are precedents for compelling family members to provide assistance in extenuating circumstances. Your sister's situation qualifies as such." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. "Her situation?" I snapped. "What about mine? Did she tell you this could kill me?" There was a pause, and then she said, "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. I suggest you seek your own legal counsel." I hung up, shaking with rage and fear. The audacity of it all. The lengths they were willing to go to was almost incomprehensible. When Ethan came home that evening, I told him everything. His expression hardened with every word. "They're completely unhinged," he said. "We need to document everything." So that's what we did. Every text, every voicemail, every note they left at the house. I saved it all. Ethan created a spreadsheet, logging every instance of harassment with dates and times. It was both cathartic and horrifying, a tangible record of just how far they were willing to push me. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I learned about the medical records. A cousin reached out, ostensibly to check in on me, but it quickly became clear she had an agenda. "I heard you've been refusing to help Sophia," she said, her tone dripping with judgment. "And after everything your family has done for you, where did you hear that?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your mom told me," she admitted. "And she showed us your medical records. She said you're perfectly healthy, and just using your condition as an excuse to be selfish." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Those records are fake," I said through gritted teeth. "They forged them because my actual medical records say the opposite." The cousin paused, clearly taken aback. "Well, I don't know about that," she said hesitantly. "But it's hard to see why you wouldn't want to help your sister. She's been through so much." I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret. But the damage was done. Over the next few days, I started receiving messages from other relatives, some concerned, others outright hostile. "How could you turn your back on family?" one text read. Another was even more pointed. "Is Ethan controlling you? This doesn't sound like the girl we know." The insinuation that Ethan was somehow manipulating me made my blood boil. He had been nothing but supportive, my anchor in a storm that threatened to drown me. But my parents were master manipulators, and they'd clearly weaponized my relatives against me. One night, as I scrolled through the latest barrage of messages, Ethan sat beside me, watching with a mixture of anger and sadness. "They're trying to isolate you," he said quietly. "That's what abusers do. They make you doubt yourself and push everyone else's opinions onto you until you feel like you have no choice but to give in." I nodded, tears welling up despite my best efforts to hold them back. "What if they don't stop?" I whispered. "What if they just keep coming?" "They won't," Ethan said firmly. "Because we're going to stop them first." He reached for his laptop and started drafting an email to our lawyer. Meanwhile, I stared at my phone, the screen blurring through my tears. Somewhere deep down, I still hoped they'd realize how wrong they were, that they'd see the damage they were causing and back off. But the rational part of me knew better. My parents and Sophia weren't just fighting for a baby, they were fighting for control. And as long as I resisted, they would never stop. After weeks of harassment, I needed answers. My condition wasn't some vague inconvenience my parents could sweep under the rug. It was a life-threatening reality. Ethan and I decided it was time to get the truth from someone who actually understood my medical situation. We made an appointment with my cardiologist, Dr. Patel, and told her everything. As I recounted the ordeal, her expression shifted from shock to anger. "They forged medical records?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "And they're using those to pressure you into a surrogacy that could be fatal?" I nodded, gripping Ethan's hand tightly. "I don't even know how they got the information to fake the records in the first place," I admitted. Dr. Patel leaned forward, her tone serious. "I'll have my office check our security protocols, but you need to know, this is beyond unethical. If they tried to access your real records, that's a clear violation of privacy laws. And forging medical documents? That's a criminal offense." Her words were a strange mix of comforting and terrifying. On one hand, it was validating to hear a professional confirm how wrong my parents' actions were. On the other hand, it was chilling to realize the lengths they had gone to. "We'll support you however we can," Dr. Patel continued. "If you decide to pursue legal action, I'll provide any documentation or testimony you need." With Dr. Patel's assurance, Ethan and I took the next step, consulting a lawyer. Sitting in the sterile, professional office, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Our lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Lisa, listened intently as we laid out the situation. "Let me get this straight," Lisa said, flipping through the folder of evidence we'd brought. "Your parents forged medical records to manipulate you into becoming a surrogate, have been harassing you nonstop, and may have illegally attempted to access your real medical files." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking slightly. Lisa set the papers down and looked me in the eye. "First of all, they can't legally force you to be a surrogate. That's not even a gray area. It's impossible. But the forgery? That's a serious crime. If you're ready, we can send them a cease and desist letter." That'll put them on notice, and if they continue this behavior, we'll have grounds to escalate. Ethan leaned forward. And if they don't stop? Then we file charges, Lisa said bluntly. Harassment, forgery, potential HIPAA violations. It won't be pretty, but it'll get them off your back. We agreed to proceed with the letter. Lisa drafted it that same day, a firm yet formal warning that outlined everything my parents had done and demanded they cease all contact with me immediately. Meanwhile, things were unraveling on Sophia's end. Up until now, Eric had been a passive observer, never stepping in to defend me but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. That changed after the lawyer's letter was sent. One evening, I got a text from Eric out of the blue. It was the first time he'd reached out to me directly, and his tone was oddly apologetic. I just found out about the forged records, the message read. I didn't know how far they were going. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, conflicted. Part of me wanted to lash out. How could he have stood by while his wife and in-laws tormented me? But another part of me appreciated the apology, however late it was. Ethan noticed my hesitation. Do you think he's being sincere? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. But at least he's acknowledging it. That's more than I can say for anyone else. A few days later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Eric had moved out of the house he shared with Sophia. Apparently, their marriage had taken a serious hit after he confronted her about the forged records. She tried to downplay it, but Eric wasn't buying her excuses. He said it wasn't just about the records, the acquaintance told me. It was the principle of it, the way Sophia and your parents handled the whole thing. He couldn't stand by and watch anymore. Hearing that gave me a strange sense of vindication. Sophia had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But now, even her husband was starting to see her true colors. Despite these small victories, the situation was far from over. My parents ignored the cease and desist letter, continuing their campaign of manipulation through other channels. Extended family members started spreading rumors, accusing Ethan and me of overreacting. They're just trying to help Sophia, one aunt wrote on Facebook. It's sad to see how selfish some people can be. I wanted to scream. No one seemed to understand or care that my life was literally on the line. The fake medical records had taken on a life of their own, becoming the basis for a twisted narrative where I was the villain and Sophia was the victim. But Ethan and I stayed the course. With Lisa's guidance, we continued documenting everything and prepared for the possibility of taking legal action. It was exhausting, both emotionally and financially, but it was our only option. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. It wasn't much, and the battle was far from won, but it was enough to keep me going. My parents had built their web of lies to trap me, but piece by piece, it was starting to fall apart. And I was determined to see it crumble entirely. For a brief moment, the cease and desist letter felt like a miracle. My parents stopped calling, and the endless barrage of texts and voicemails came to a halt. Even Sophia went silent. Ethan and I had a few blissfully quiet days where we could breathe again, though the tension lingered like a shadow over every conversation. But peace didn't last long. The damage my parents had already done to my reputation within the family began to spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into confrontations, often thinly veiled under the guise of concern. It started with a text from an aunt I barely spoke to. I don't know what's happening between you and your parents, she wrote, but this isn't the way to handle it. Families stick together. Then came a phone call from my cousin Marie, who had always been more of an observer than a participant in family drama. Look, I'm not taking sides, she said, which was always a prelude to doing exactly that. But your mom told us they had to take drastic measures because you've been uncooperative. Is it true you refused to even consider helping Sophia? I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. Did she also tell you they forged my medical records? That pregnancy could kill me. Marie hesitated. Well, they said you're exaggerating about your condition. They showed everyone the records. I don't know, it just seems like maybe there's more to the story. There was always more to the story with my parents, a carefully curated version that painted them as loving, long-suffering parents doing their best for an ungrateful daughter. I ended the call, my hand shaking, and blocked Marie's number. The social media fallout started soon after. Sophia, ever the golden child, was a master at playing the victim. She posted a cryptic status that read, "It's heartbreaking when the people you love the most can't be there for you in your time of need." Some people just don't understand the meaning of family. Her friends were quick to rally around her. Comments poured in, full of sympathy and outrage. You deserve so much better, Sophia. Family doesn't treat each other like that. Whoever's doing this to you clearly doesn't have a heart. I wanted to scream at the absurdity of it all. These people didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the forged records, the harassment, or the very real risks to my health. But Sophia didn't need facts. She had charm and the unwavering support of people who only saw the version of her she wanted them to see. Ethan urged me to stay off social media, but curiosity got the better of me. The more I scrolled, the angrier I became. The narrative wasn't just that I was selfish. It was that I was a liar, someone who was making up health issues to shirk her responsibilities. I couldn't help myself. I posted a response, brief but pointed. There are two sides to every story, and not all sacrifices are worth making. My life isn't a bargaining chip for someone else's happiness. The backlash was immediate. Sophia's friends flooded the comments, attacking me with thinly veiled insults. Wow, imagine being this bitter, one wrote. Another added, it's obvious who the selfish one is in this situation. Even some family members joined in, echoing the same manipulative lines my parents had used. Family means everything. Why would you turn your back on your own sister? Ethan found me crying over my phone that night, my nerves completely frayed. It's like they're everywhere, I said, my voice breaking. No matter what I do, they just twist it into something worse. He took the phone from my hands, gently but firmly. You can't engage with them, he said. They're not interested in the truth. They just want to control the narrative. Let them talk. The people who matter know the real story. But even knowing that didn't make it easier. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a pang of anxiety, bracing myself for the next attack. The emotional toll was relentless. Ethan did his best to reassure me, but I could see the stress wearing on him too. He started checking the locks more often, keeping an eye on the street outside, as if expecting my parents to show up again. One day, I received an email from a distant uncle who had always seemed reasonable. He had clearly taken the time to write it, his words carefully chosen.
Dear,
I've been hearing a lot about what's been happening in the family, and I wanted to reach out directly. I don't know all the details, but it sounds like there's a lot of hurt on both sides. I know your parents can be intense, but they love you. Maybe this has all been a misunderstanding. If you're willing, I'd love to mediate and help everyone find some common ground. I stared at the email for a long time, torn between anger and exhaustion. The idea of sitting down with my parents to mediate was laughable. They didn't want resolution. They wanted obedience. I didn't respond. Over time, the cracks in Sophia's perfect facade began to show, though not nearly as quickly as I'd hoped. A few of her closer friends started asking questions, especially after I quietly reached out to one of them, a mutual friend from childhood, to explain my side. While most of them remained firmly in her corner, the small victories gave me hope. Still, the constant scrutiny was crushing. Every day felt like a battle to protect not just my physical health, but my mental well-being. I started therapy, desperate for tools to cope with the overwhelming stress and betrayal. The therapist's office became my sanctuary, a place where I could unpack the tangled mess of emotions without fear of judgment. It's okay to mourn the family you thought you had, she told me during one session. But you don't owe them your life. You have a right to set boundaries, even if it means walking away. Her words were a lifeline, something I clung to when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But deep down, I knew the worst wasn't over. Sophia and my parents weren't just fighting for their version of events. They were fighting to win. And as much as I wanted to believe I could withstand their attacks, I wasn't sure how much more I could take. Sophia had always been the golden child, but her charm was beginning to wear thin. While her public campaign initially garnered support, cracks started to form as the truth began to seep out. The final blow came from the one person I least expected, Eric. It started with a Facebook post. Sophia, emboldened by her chorus of supporters, had shared yet another cryptic update. It's sad when family turns their back on you during your hardest times. Some people will never understand the sacrifices others make for them. I scrolled past it, as I'd done with all her other posts, trying not to let it get under my skin. But a few hours later, my phone buzzed with a flurry of notifications. Curious, I opened the app again and saw Eric's name in the comment section. His words hit like a thunderclap. Sacrifices? You mean the forged medical records? The constant harassment? The lies? Maybe it's time you tell people the real story, Sophia. The post exploded. Sophia's friends and supporters were initially defensive, accusing Eric of being out of line or not understanding what Sophia was going through. But Eric didn't back down. He responded to each comment calmly, laying out the facts. I was there when her parents pressured her to risk her life for Sophia. I saw the fake records. I tried to stay out of it, but this has gone too far. It's time for the truth. Within hours, Sophia's post was deleted, but the damage was done. Screenshots of Eric's comments circulated, sparking heated discussions among her friends and even some family members. A few reached out to me privately, offering hesitant apologies for believing Sophia's narrative. "Why didn't you tell us?" one cousin asked in a DM. "I tried," I replied simply. Sophia, of course, didn't take it well. The next day, she sent me a long, rambling email. It started with a half-hearted apology. "I'm sorry if I've hurt you, but you have to understand how hard this has been for me." The rest of the email alternated between pleas and guilt trips. She begged me to reconsider, claiming her life was falling apart. Eric's left me, and everyone is turning against me. All I wanted was a chance to have a family. Is that so wrong? Then came the blame. "I've always been there for you, and this is how you repay me? I'm losing everything because you couldn't put your fears aside for one moment. You've always been so dramatic about your health. Maybe if you'd been stronger, none of this would have happened." Reading her words felt like being dragged underwater. My chest tightened as I fought to process the sheer audacity of her message. Even now, after everything, she refused to take responsibility. Ethan found me sitting on the couch, the email open on my laptop. He read it over my shoulder, his expression darkening with each sentence. "You're not responding to this," he said firmly. "I wasn't planning to," I said, my voice shaky. Sophia wasn't the only one scrambling to regain control of the narrative. My parents, desperate to salvage their reputation, started reaching out to relatives directly. They painted themselves as loving, concerned parents who had been misunderstood. It was all done out of love, my mom said in one message to a family group chat. "We only wanted what was best for both our daughters." It's heartbreaking to see my name twist this into something ugly. It was laughable. These were the same people who had dismissed my health as an inconvenience, who had tried to coerce me into risking my life for Sophia's happiness. Now, they were pretending to be devoted, selfless parents who cared about my well-being. I decided to cut contact entirely. I blocked their numbers, left the family group chats, and ignored any messages that made their way through. Even relatives who claimed to understand both sides were met with silence. If they couldn't see the truth by now, they never would. But cutting them off didn't stop the lingering effects of their manipulation. Sophia's email replayed in my mind like a broken record. The guilt she had planted was insidious, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. What if she's right? I admitted to Ethan one night, as we sat in bed. What if I really am the reason her life is falling apart? Ethan turned to me, his eyes full of quiet determination. "Her life is falling apart because of her choices, not yours. She lied, she manipulated, and now she's facing the consequences. That's not on you." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of my family's expectations was hard to shake. For so long, I had been conditioned to think of myself as a burden, as someone who owed them for their sacrifices. Breaking free of that mindset felt impossible at times. But deep down, I knew Ethan was right. Sophia's breaking point wasn't my fault. It was the inevitable result of years of entitlement and manipulation. And no matter how much she tried to blame me, I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. For the first time in weeks, I deleted her email without reading it again. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. Even so, I knew this wasn't the end. Sophia and my parents weren't the type to let go easily. They'd pushed me to my limits before, and I had no doubt they'd try again. But for now, I was ready to fight back. And this time, I wasn't alone. In the aftermath of Sophia's failed smear campaign, something surprising happened. Cracks began to appear in the unified front my parents had worked so hard to build. Slowly, cautiously, a few relatives reached out to me, not to scold or accuse, but to apologize. The first message came from my Aunt Linda, my dad's younger sister. She was never particularly close to me, but her tone was genuine. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," she wrote. "I don't know how I let myself get swept up in your parents' version of things. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that." Her apology made me cry, not because it erased the hurt, but because it felt like a tiny validation in a sea of blame. I responded cautiously, thanking her, but keeping the exchange brief. I didn't know if I could trust her yet, or if she was simply testing the waters before reporting back to my parents. But then another message came, and another. A cousin admitted they had no idea my parents had forged medical records and felt sickened by it. A second cousin shared a story about how my parents had manipulated her into loaning them money years ago, promising to pay her back and never following through. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised," she wrote. "They've always been good at making themselves look like the victims." These messages didn't heal the wounds, but they were a balm of sorts. They reminded me that the version of events my parents had crafted wasn't as airtight as they'd hoped. People were beginning to see through their facade, and while I wasn't holding my breath for a full family-wide reckoning, it felt good to know I wasn't entirely alone. Ethan encouraged me to lean into this fragile network of support. "If they're willing to back you up," he said, "it could help when we take this to court." That was the next step, legal action. Ethan and I had discussed it endlessly, and after weeks of documenting everything, emails, texts, the forged medical records, we finally decided to move forward. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about forcing my parents to face consequences, though part of me certainly craved that. It was about protecting ourselves, about making sure they couldn't do this again, to me or anyone else. Lisa, our lawyer, was thorough and relentless. She began building a case that outlined every instance of harassment and manipulation, each one tied back to the forged documents my parents had created. "If we can prove they falsified medical records and shared them without your consent," Lisa said during one meeting, "that alone is enough to bring charges." But the harassment adds another layer. They've crossed so many lines it's hard to keep track. As we moved deeper into the legal process, I found myself plagued by guilt. No matter how much I reminded myself of their actions, how they'd ignored my health, forged my records, and manipulated my family against me, I couldn't fully escape the voice in my head whispering, "They're still your parents." That voice felt strongest late at night, when the world was quiet, and my mind replayed the moments of my childhood that weren't tainted by pain. The way my mom used to read to me when I was sick, her voice soft and soothing. The rare occasions my dad would carry me to bed after a late night, his arms strong and steady. Those memories felt like betrayal now, fragments of a family that no longer existed. One evening, as Ethan and I sorted through our evidence for Lisa, I caught myself staring at a photo I'd found in an old album. It was from a summer vacation when I was 8, long before Sophia's shadow had swallowed me whole. In the picture, my dad was holding my hand, and my mom was laughing at something off camera. For a moment, I let myself mourn what could have been. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked gently, noticing my silence. I set the photo down, my voice trembling. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "All the time. But then I remember what they've done to you, what they were willing to do to you. They didn't see you as their daughter. They saw you as a solution to Sophia's problems. And that's not love. That's control." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. I nodded, wiping away a stray tear.
He was right.
Every time I second-guessed myself, I needed to remember the way they'd looked at me, not with love or concern, but with expectation. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a means to an end. Despite my resolve, the process of cutting them off entirely was harder than I'd imagined. The guilt wasn't just internal, it was external, too. Every so often, I'd get another message from a family member urging me to fix things. "Your parents miss you," one uncle wrote. "You should try talking to them. Life's too short for grudges." I wanted to scream. Grudges? This wasn't a petty argument over a dinner table. It was a coordinated attempt to erase my autonomy, to put my life at risk for their benefit. But explaining that to people who refused to see the truth felt like shouting into the void. For my own sanity, I stopped responding altogether. If they couldn't understand by now, they never would. The decision to move forward with legal action wasn't without its challenges. Lisa warned us that cases involving family could get messy, especially when the other side was as manipulative as my parents. But every step we took, every document we filed, every piece of evidence we submitted, felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. It wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't even about winning. It was about finally saying, "I won't let you control me anymore." For a brief moment, it felt like the storm had passed. My parents went silent. The calls, texts, and surprise visits stopped. Even the online smear campaign Sophia had started seemed to fade as her energy shifted elsewhere. After her public fallout with Eric, she moved back in with my parents, retreating into their shared cocoon of denial and self-righteousness. Ethan and I tried to focus on rebuilding our lives. We spent evenings decluttering the house, a therapeutic exercise to reclaim our space after months of emotional chaos. I started therapy, determined to unpack the years of guilt and manipulation that had shaped me. Ethan, ever the steady presence in my life, quietly supported me every step of the way. But the scars ran deep. Even in moments of peace, I felt the weight of what had happened. I'd catch myself flinching every time the doorbell rang or my phone buzzed, half expecting my parents to be on the other side. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake replaying their words, the accusations, the manipulation, the guilt. No matter how much I reminded myself that I'd made the right choice, their voices still haunted me. Then, one night, a letter arrived. Ethan brought it in from the mailbox, flipping through the usual pile of bills and junk mail before pausing. "This one doesn't have a return address," he said, holding up an envelope with shaky handwriting on the front. My stomach tightened as I took it from him. I didn't recognize the writing at first, but the moment I opened it, I knew. The words were unmistakable. It was from my dad. The letter was short and rambling, the sentences uneven, as if he'd written it in a rush or through tears. "Please come back. Your mom isn't doing well. The stress of everything has made her sick, and we're worried about her heart. She cries every night, wondering why her daughter hates her so much. I know mistakes were made, but we're still your family. Don't let this anger destroy us all. Please, I'm begging you." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Ethan leaned over my shoulder to read it, his expression hardening as he reached the end. "It's another manipulation tactic," he said firmly. "They're trying to guilt you into coming back." I nodded, but a tiny voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let it go. What if it's true? What if Mom really is sick? What if I'm letting my anger blind me to something real? For days, the letter lingered in my mind. I went back and forth, trying to untangle my emotions. On one hand, I knew Ethan was right. My parents had spent my entire life weaponizing guilt to control me. Why would this be any different? On the other hand, what if this time was different? What if my decision to cut them off was causing real harm? In therapy, I brought up the letter, hoping for clarity. "My dad says my mom's health is failing because of me," I told my therapist, my voice shaking. What if he's telling the truth? What if I'm making things worse by staying away? My therapist studied me for a moment before responding. "It sounds like you're taking on a lot of responsibility for their choices," she said gently. "Let's say, for argument's sake, that your mom's health is suffering. Is that really because of you? Or is it because of the stress they created with their actions?" I didn't answer. The rational part of me knew she was right, but the guilt I'd carried my whole life didn't dissolve so easily. Ethan was less subtle. "They're manipulating you," he said one night as we sat on the couch. "If your mom really needed help, they'd go through a doctor, not send you a guilt-ridden letter with no proof. Think about it. Have they ever been honest about anything when it didn't serve their agenda?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know, but what if this time is different? What if something really is wrong?" He reached for my hand, his grip firm but reassuring. "And if something is wrong, is it your responsibility to fix it? They made their choices. You're not responsible for the consequences." Despite his words, the doubt gnawed at me. The letter sat on the kitchen counter, a physical reminder of the fragile line I was walking. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to finally break free of their hold on me. But another part couldn't let it go. In the days that followed, I found myself paralyzed by indecision. Every time I thought about ignoring the letter, a wave of guilt washed over me. But when I considered responding, the anger returned. Anger at their manipulation, at their refusal to take accountability, at the years of pain they'd caused. In the end, I left the letter where it was, untouched and unanswered. It felt like the only choice I could make. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The silence, the letter, it was the calm before the storm. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what was coming next. I still haven't decided what to do. Cutting off my family felt like the only way to protect myself, but the weight of that decision grows heavier every day. It's not like flipping a switch. It's like trying to turn off the constant hum of a machine you've lived with your entire life. The noise fades, but you can still feel the vibrations under your skin. Every time I look at my son, I wonder what kind of example I'm setting. Am I teaching him the importance of standing up for himself, of drawing boundaries even when it's painful? Or am I teaching him to run away from hard things? I ask myself these questions late at night when the house is quiet and the weight of everything feels unbearable. I imagine him years from now, grown up and facing a decision that feels just as impossible. Will he think back to me, to this moment, and feel proud of the way I handled it? Or will he see my choices as a failure? Ethan reassures me constantly, but I can tell the ordeal has taken its toll on him too. He's been my rock through this, never wavering, but even rocks crack under enough pressure. Sometimes, late at night, I catch him staring at our son with a look I can't quite place, something between love and determination. It's as if he's silently promising to be everything my parents weren't, to create a home where love doesn't come with conditions. The legal case is still ongoing. Lisa says we're making progress, but the wheels of justice turn painfully slow. Every step forward feels like wading through quicksand, the weight of the past dragging us down. The forged medical records remain at the center of the case, and while my parents' silence has been deafening since we served them with a lawsuit, I know it's not over. My parents have always been skilled at playing the long game, and I can't shake the feeling that they're just biding their time, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. Sophia has been quieter than I expected. Since Eric's public takedown of her campaign, she's retreated into the background. But I don't trust her silence any more than I trust my parents. I wonder if she's planning something, or if she's just too busy wallowing in the consequences of her own actions. Sometimes, I catch myself wanting to forgive her. She was their golden child, after all, molded by years of favoritism into someone who couldn't see past her own entitlement. Part of me wants to believe she's as much a victim of their manipulation as I am. But another part knows better. Sophia isn't a puppet. She made her own choices, and she chose to throw me under the bus to get what she wanted. For now, I'm trying to focus on the family I've chosen, the one I've built with Ethan and our son. It's not easy. Some days, the anger and hurt feel too big to ignore, looming over me like a storm cloud I can't escape. I replay their words in my head, feel the sting of their accusations, and wonder if they ever truly saw me as a person or just as an extension of their plans. Other days, I feel lighter, almost free. On those days, I can remind myself that I'm not their puppet anymore, that I'm choosing to live my life on my terms, even if it means walking away from the people who are supposed to love me unconditionally. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe the lawsuit will bring some closure, or maybe it will just be another chapter in this never-ending saga. Maybe Sophia will reach out one day, not with accusations or guilt trips, but with a genuine desire to make amends. Or maybe she won't, and we'll both carry our separate wounds for the rest of our lives. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. Some days, that's all I can do. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like that might be enough.